Has every game idea that you've had just been blown completely out of proportion into a project that's impossible to finish and it will never see the light of day? Well, don't worry, because you're definitely not alone. I've struggled with scope creep a ton, but since the release of my commercial title Grub Truck, I've found one trick that seems to eliminate my scope creep, and I'm going to share that with you today. Before settling on the idea of Grub Truck, I iterated through a ton of different game ideas, ranging from an in-depth military management game, all the way to a multiplayer car dealership game, even like a paintball management sim. The ideas themselves were all actually quite cool, it's just they all were way too out of my scope. You'd need to be a funded, multiple person studio to realistically achieve even a minimum viable product for any of these games, especially not for someone who is a uni-bedroom game developer hobbyist. But at the time, I really wanted to delve into the world of commercial games and see if it's something that I could use as a business avenue. So something had to change. My trick was, and still is today, to limit the playable area for both me as the game developer as well as the actual player themselves. For example, the idea of Grub Truck actually came from a little challenge I set myself to see if I could create a fun game that had a really small playable area. If you've played Grub Truck, if you haven't, go play it, you'll know that the playable area is actually tiny, and I really wanted to see if I could design and create a game and market it to an audience where the space was actually tiny. Now, don't get me wrong, Grub Truck's not perfect, but I'm very pleased with that outcome specifically. I feel like I've really achieved that challenge of making a tiny little playable area really fun. From that one minuscule challenge, I managed to complete a whole game project, release it on Steam, and would end up selling over 900 copies of the game. And that's just from that one little limitation I set myself of having a tiny playable area. That obviously meant that I couldn't then go and make it so that you could drive the truck or leave the truck and explore the world. And that meant that my scope was very narrow. Not too narrow to the fact that it was boring, but narrow enough for me not to be able to expand upon what was actually needed. By defining the hard boundaries, I stopped my creative brain from just going off on one, and I set myself a strict limit of what I can and can't do. Therefore, the scope creep was kept in line. And it's working again for my next project. Don't get me wrong, the next one's got a much larger playable area, but that's because I believe I can actually complete the project with a bit of a bigger scope than before now that I've seen one through. But for example, it's a shop sim set in a train station, and there's only obviously so much space on a little cozy train station, and the village that the player is in is quite a small village, and I've kind of made a deal with myself that I'm not going to expand the village unless I absolutely have to. The idea is that if I'm going to add a feature, it needs to go into one of the existing spaces in that village, which A, makes it a bit more fun for me because it feels like a game making the game in a sense. You know how in, say, a city builder like City Skylines, you only have so much space because there's a river there, you can't build on the river, so you'd have to build the village around it on that ground. And for me it's the same. When I'm making that game, I want to feel like I'm actually creating a world. If you can't tell, I love city builders, so maybe that's where this is coming from. If you take a look at the village, there's a few buildings that are quite evidently already specific for the player's use, but there's some buildings that currently are just there as empty hollow shells. My plan is long term to have all of, if not most of the buildings have a use. Now, some of the buildings are going to be just villager homes, but some of them I want little shops like a little post office or a little butcher's and things like that that the player can actually go to and utilise. So having this small playable village has limited my scope creep, because if I'm going to add something like a post office, it's got to be something that actually is going to be worth using up that big chunk of space in this tiny little village. And again, for the player, they now don't have to explore this huge world, therefore I don't have to design a huge world. So if you're currently struggling with scope creep, don't feel like you've got to shrink your dreams, you've just got to fence them in. And it doesn't have to be playable space in the physical world either. It could be a content restriction. So for example, say you're making a restaurant sim or some kind of a cooking game, you could limit it to just one cuisine. So with Grub Truck, there isn't really a set cuisine other than with the Greek DLC, which go check out on Steam, thanks. So if you are making a cooking game, why not limit it to just Italian cuisine and make that whole game just about Italian food? Therefore, you're going to have less systems because you're only going to have one kind of set of cooking. You're only going to have one series of recipes. You're only going to have so many models for food. And not only that, it could also actually market your game. You know, having a game that's very clearly an Italian cuisine cooking sim is going to stand out from a generic cooking sim. Let's take another example. Let's say you're making a first-person shooter game. Why not limit the weapons that the player can actually use? So instead of giving the player the option to use 100 different weapons in this game, why not limit it to a selection of 10 and set it so that the lore behind that makes sense with the world? So let's say it's a survival-based FPS. You could make it so that all the weapons have been found in this wasteland. You don't have this huge arsenal of weapons to select from. So again, you've made like quite a cool narrative hook with a game design restriction for both the player, so they feel like those weapons are worth a lot more to them and they want to like get a lot more skill using those weapons. And for you as a developer, you have a lot less to make. I think we should make a deal right now. If you are struggling with scope creep, type in the comment one thing, one boundary that you could add right now today to your game to limit your scope creep. Even if it's not going to fix it completely, just one tiny little boundary. So that's my secret, physical boundaries. Not just physical boundaries, but mainly physical boundaries, because I'm quite a visual person. So that helps me to limit my scope creep a lot more, because my features, they're usually dreamt from seeing empty space that I could fill and add a feature for the player. If it veers its ugly head again, obviously you can just add another set of boundaries. So again, let's say back to my shop sim. I'm currently contemplating whether it should be a complete shop sim where you can have a variety of options, or whether it should be a very specific type of item. Now, I'm not 100% sure if I am going to set a boundary here yet, because I think I can still get through that task without having to worry about my scope creep. But for example, I could make a toy shop simulator. I could make a sweet shop simulator, and I think that would make it more unique. However, I'm not sure if I'm actually going to go with that option yet, but it's just an idea if you're in a similar situation or making a similar game. Do let me know if this has helped, and I'd love to see what you're actually making. So if you have used some of the feedback and you've limited your scope, or you want some feedback on how your scope is currently getting a little bit too large, come and join the Discord server, links in the description, share your project, and I'd love to see what you're working on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.